Hi, good afternoon, everyone, here and online. Thanks for coming to our presentation. So we would like to begin with our key question for today, Brian. So if you would like to ask that question for us.
So this is interesting. It links up with the theme of the conference, this idea of living in silos. And one silo that we often talk about is this idea of competition. And that there's a bit of, we've written about this idea of a dysfunction in the relationship between the research committee and the people that the research is intended for, teachers. And in some ways, this has become a greater dysfunction with competition for resources, competition for bringing students into programs, and it's basically making the whole relationship problematic, worse so.
Okay, so we have a tentative answer to our question.
Yes.
And that answer is geoethnography. So we believe that geoethnography as a methodology as well as a pedagogy can open up possibilities for mending that broken relationships and breaking the silos that Brian, you mentioned, that because of competition, because of individualism in the research culture. So how we can do that. So for how we can create a more collaborative and caring and ethical research culture. So, and for that question, one possible answer is geoethnography, and that's what we are going to talk about today.
Yeah, it was interesting that the plenary today by Jeff Lawrence was mentioning words like heart and affect, community. So you can see, again, these are things that we seem to have lost along the way with the structure of research in a very kind of entrepreneurial environment.
Yeah, exactly. So I was also thinking about Jeff Lawrence's plenary this morning, how, and then the need to build this ethical, caring community, and then the role of affect and emotions in research, in knowledge creation. And we also have written about that in our previous work together. So the role of emotions in epistemic practices, which is not often talk about, like emotion and knowledge creation at the same time, but we try to do that as well. So this is really relevant for the conference.
And you also said the word collective agency, which is really interesting. Again, when you work together, you start to see these kind of common practices or possibilities that the structure of hiring, funding, does not reward or recognize.
Exactly, exactly. So what is geoethnography then, right? If it is something that we're promising that it's a good thing, then what is it? Right? So it is a methodology where two individuals juxtapose their life experiences, their histories, and interrogate a question of common interest. So that's how it begins. And it is dialogic in nature, inherently dialogic. You begin with a question, but you don't know the answers to the question. All right, so that's how you investigate with an open mind, and then you bring in multiple perspectives, you interrogate the question from different points of view, and then you try to understand that question. So the goal is really to understand rather than probably explain the causal relationships between things.
So this third point is interesting. Norris and Sawyer make a clear contrast between autoethnography and duethnography. So they claim that autoethnography is an exploration of the self. An exploration of self. They say the purpose of duoethnography is that the self becomes the source of insight on a common problem, and how different stakeholders start to understand how that problem positions them. It could be in the case of a school policy. It could be in case of a community initiative. So it really makes this difference. It's not just understanding, it's understanding towards some kind of social action. And that's, I think, one of the big strengths of this model.
Right. And this also requires an affective engagement and understanding. Again, like going back to Jeb's plenary probably this morning, like this, the role of affect. And because you have to be ready to be vulnerable in front of the other, both during the research process as well as after. Like so long as other people will read your published duoethnography.
Yeah.
So you have to remain vulnerable. You have to remain comfortable with that because you are opening up, you're revealing some part of yourself, your life, histories, experiences. So that's the affective aspect of research here, right? And I mean, there are a number of characteristic features of duoethnography, but we have only a few here. But the last one that we included here, that as methodology, duoethnography doesn't end with the conclusion of your paper. It doesn't end there. It continues as the readers engage with you through their reading practices. So that's how we pause a paper because we have to and submit to a journal, but we don't intend to end there. So that's another thing that we have to be mindful of how we conclude our duoethnographies, right? So just something to
it's a real difficult response to reading a duoethnography. The whole culture of academe is the hierarchy of the knower.
Right.
The academic has found an answer, he's found a solution, and it's usually he, right? So it's this whole model of saying, well, here are multiple perspectives on the problem. We give the trust to the reader to determine based on their positionality, their work, their community, what they see as the most most relevant for what they want to adopt. So it really challenges the whole structure of authority in academic work.
Yeah, the silo of the research culture, really. Like as a researcher, when we are seen as a knowing subject,
that's right,
and then we are expected to propose something, to like a set of recommendations or pedagogical models, whatever, right? So that it will change the problems in the real world, right? So that's what we are expected of. But in the case of duoethnography, we don't want to do that. We end with epistemic humility. We share our experiences and understandings, and then we trust our readers. So that's where the possibility of breaking the silos come in and building solidarities and relationships. And then how do you conduct a duoethnography? Then it is purposeful pairing. So you pair with someone that shares same kind of commitment, same kind of interest, and you co-frame the inquiry. There is no hierarchy really, even though, I mean, you have to write one person's name first and then the other person when you write the paper, but it is really a co-inquiry. And is dialogic. The dialogue itself is the data. So dialogue is both the process of research, but also it generates the data, right? And then, as I already mentioned, you juxtapose your life histories, your lived experiences, and you interrogate your question. And then it is cyclical, inherently cyclical, the whole process, and it is relational. And that's how you think about the validity of your research, your methodology. So it is a relational, cyclical, and reflexive, right? So these are some of the characteristics of duoethnography, and especially the methodological side of it. And then, Brian, if you would like to talk about how do you write a paper, like a duoethnography paper, once we
So it's interesting because we've written about 5 or 6 now, also with other colleagues, and it's interesting to see what reviewers have to say. And one of the common issues comes up is greater transparency in the actual process that you've undertaken. I don't know if you've had that experience too. So people want, we're still deeply enmeshed for good reasons about issues of validity, reliability. So they want to see this kind of, how did it come about? And when we do this, we often start with some topic or a call for papers. And we'll start with a conversation on Zoom, which we'll record. And then from that, we'll look at constructing a Google Doc often.
Yeah.
And then there'll be like marginal notes. So there'll be this kind of reflexivity, new ideas will pop up so we can go back. And then what often happens is that there's a flow. There's like a flow of ideas that the feedback will put it into a new direction that we both comment on. There'll be suggestions of readings. I've read this, and then we'll go back to the paper. New ideas in the marginal notes of the doc will emerge. And then when we send it out to reviewers again, there'll be again new suggestions of building cohesion for a particular group.
And oftentimes we get inspiration and ideas for our next paper or next geoethnography from one of our margin notes. So we don't delete the notes.
No.
We copy the document and then clean it up for for the journal. But our messy document is really a good resource for us. Right, so we often go back to those notes, and then we review certain ideas that we mentioned, and that's how we write the paper.
I also say that we've talked about how this reflects classroom interaction, these kinds of multiple feedback processes. So it's a research model that closely parallels the kind of teacher-student interactions you have, which again makes it a more reliable or relevant kind of research model.
Thanks. So now, to date, we have seen that geoethnography has been somewhat popular in educational studies, like curriculum studies, and it has been influenced heavily by continental philosophy and some educational theories, like curriculum theory, like William Piner's idea of curere and concepts like that. But we are trying, through our work, Brian and I are trying to extend this approach by engaging other concepts like Bateson's metalog or cultural keystone species. So if you'd like to briefly comment on those concepts.
Bateson's metalog is very similar. It's a conversation that doesn't have predictable linear sequencing. But what brings it back to a kind of cohesion is the interaction and feedback, which is very much we find with the geoethnography. Cultural keystone species is a really interesting ecological idea that we've been working with in terms of keystone practices in our work. And what it means is that in any ecosystem, there may be one species whose role in sustaining that environment far outweighs their actual number in that area. So they become central to the cohesion of that environment. So we've been looking at what would be keystone practices. And I think Jeff raised on them today when he was talking about this idea of heart, community. And so this is things that get lost in transdisciplinary work that we talk about. We look at what's keystone for our field. How does geoethnography reflect that?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, actually, currently we're writing a paper about identifying keystone practices in EAP.
Yeah.
Right. So, and another point I just wanted to briefly mention is the idea of relationality, and we are drawing on some indigenous scholars about the idea of relationality and how we can apply it to our research practices. So I know we're almost running out of time. So again, so the rationale for this extension here is to break the silos and build solidarities, especially in languages and literacy education. And we hope that this methodology will provide some avenues for that, some ways of creating a space for epistemic humility, which we both agree that we need in this competitive and individualistic research culture. But we also recognize that doing dialogic work is not without challenges, especially in the current climate of ranking and metrics and competition. So we are mindful of that. So here, if you're interested in how we have approached this topic, and we have published some papers. So here's one, and there is another one, and one more. Okay, right. And so would like to
Couple of quotes.
End for now until we meet again, with a couple of quotes that we just used in the paper that we're writing at the moment. So that gives you some sort of closure for today. And would be happy to have some conversation in the spirit of geoethnography.
We'll start from